Uh, so, very, very good morning to everyone. And we have the privilege and honor to host today in our IS Literary Society of Rajasthan, a very, very esteemed and very, very special guest, the director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration at Mussoorie, Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, a serving and very, very senior Indian Administrative Service officer. Sir, it is a great honor and a pleasure to have you virtually with us to attend this session from Mussoorie. I'm sure the climate is much better in Mussoorie than it is in Rajasthan. So very, very warmly welcome you, sir, to our virtual talk session today, sir.
Thank you very much, Mugdha. In fact, the fact that I'm wearing my Jodhpurs, in Mussoorie is a reflection of how Rajasthan and Mussoorie get connected, and also gives you an idea of the sort of climate and temperature that we have here. Yes, it's very cool here, and therefore cool greetings, a very cool response. I mean, not in the, but a very warm response to your thing. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm so glad that you kept the literary spark alive, and I'm very grateful to you for this opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I totally understand the cool part. It is spelled with a K, sir. And you are one of the coolest officers that I know, sir. So thank you very much, sir. And I also very warmly welcome our lovely audience who's joining us by and by, because we are streaming this live on our Facebook page at IS Lit Talk. And very, very happy to see some known faces who've joined us today. Just for the benefit of the audience, I'd like to let you know that last Saturday also we had a fantabulous session with the photographer Aditya Arya, who did a virtual tour of the museum. And today we have with us the director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration at Mussoorie, and we will be in conversation with him on his forthcoming book, Mapping of the Indian States, Aspirations, Assertions, and Adjustments. Many, many congratulations to you, sir. And we are very, very eagerly looking forward to the book, because from the little snippets that one has read on the Twitter thread, I think it will make for a very, very fascinating read, and also a topic I think which has not really been touched so far. So on behalf of everybody who's here, our encomiums to you, sir, and congratulations for transiting into the world from where you had begun. So many, many congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, sorry.
I think I'd like to introduce. Sure, go ahead, sir. When is the book likely to come out, sir?
That's going to take some time, because I find that that every chapter is becoming so interesting. You see, the whole idea came when I had taken this batch of the officer trainees to the survey to the Survey General's office in Dehradun, and there one was seeing all the maps. I mean, how I noticed that every time the boundaries of a state change, the Surveyor General of India issues a new map. And in fact, so it was there. It was around the middle of February that this thought came to my mind that, well, nothing is written about a map whenever it is made, because each map takes a lot of effort. Each map makes a lot of sense, and each map is also. I started looking at various things around the map. Take, for example, you see the first maps in India, 1947, 1950, 52, 54. The area around Ladakh and all these places was shown as Tibet. Now, suddenly in 1954, Tibet does not find a reference, and Tibet becomes China. So I started thinking, that what actually happens. It is not that that area has suddenly, from Tibet it has become China. It is just that our perception of the area changes. So the map remaining the same, the area remaining the same, and especially the time from 47 to 50 were remarkable times. I mean, parts of Pakistan like Bhavalpur are shown in Punjab state. So that is what put me onto this journey of looking at maps. And so what my thought was that, we've had so far, I mean, although we now have 29 states, but there are about 32 editions of the map of India post 1947. So the idea was to write one chapter every time the map of India changed. And every time the map of India changed, there was a reason to it. I mean, whether that reason was caused by on account of the state's reorganization committee, or whether it is the aftermath of a long struggle, or whether it is a decision like the making of Jammu Kashmir as a union territory and Ladakh as a separate union territory. But whenever a line is drawn on the map of any nation, especially a nation as big as ours, which is actually a continent, so there's a lot of thought goes behind it, a lot of issues go behind it. So that's what I thought. It needs to be documented. It needs to be, we need to do, for example, Rajasthan. I mean, how Rajasthan became Rajasthan. Almost had one of your Rajas, agreeing to go to Pakistan because he was offered, he was told that the Rajputs and Pathans have much more in common with each other. Both want to bear arms, and I'll give a free, so we'll give a free reign to the Rajputs. So, a lot of very, very interesting things, about. So I think this is what set me on the journey of understanding of how India is. And I think that we cannot really understand India unless we've looked at the configuration of maps. And that led me to read many more books. And then, I actually wanted to use the word remapping of India, but that's already been taken by another author. About 15 years ago, Louis Tillon wrote about that, and she called it Remapping the Indian State. So I had to come up with a new name. And while coming up with a new name, I realized that every state, every linguistic group in this country aspires for something. So the Gurkhas want a Gurkha land. They aspire for it. They'll assert for it. And they'll adjust for the Gurkha Council, for example. That's true for anybody, because Punjab wanted a Maha-Punjab, might want anything. You aspire for it. You try your agitation. So Feruman goes, he has a fast son to death. But at the end of the day, you get a truncated Punjab and you settle with it. You fight over Chandigarh, your aspiration is there. You assert your rights over there, but you adjust. So it's actually the process of aspirations, political aspirations, the assertion, and that assertion takes the form of agitation, it takes the form of political machination, it takes the form of a lot of concessions. So it brings in a lot of things. So that's how I started work on this project, which is turning out to be longer than I thought it would. And so let's wait, hopefully sometimes early next year.
Sir, we need to introduce you to our audience. And I think this is a very, very contemporary topic because right now one of our neighbors up in the north is also kind of trying to talk about redefining its own map, and Nepal is what I'm talking of. So I think this conversation fits in beautifully in the contemporary time, especially as COVID has also brought home the point that we live in a global world, but the borders, we thought we were in a borderless times, but COVID has brought home this reality that actually we might need to, with all the kind of restrictions, raise the borders once again, even if they are not the walls as such, but maybe in the form of visa restrictions, or in the form of becoming more inward looking, even as our immigrants and migrants return home. So I think very, very contemporary time, the right man, the right book at the right time.
The right person to have a conversation with.
You have been kind, sir, as always. So I would like to now introduce Sir formally to our audience after that little kind of a snippet of conversation on his book. So Sir is an Indian Administrative Service Officer of the West Bengal cadre, year 1985. He joined the service at the age of 24 years of age and has already done more than 3.5 decades in the service. He joined the director of the Labasna on 1st of January 2019 and is already 1.5 years in the job. When I joined as a probationer at Labasna, Sir was already there as our deputy director and one of the coolest, most affectionate, and I would say that he has always mentored, and whenever I've met him, I have found that even if it's for a brief cameo of a second, I have always found the free flow of affection from his side. So I am extremely grateful and very, very happy to have him as our guest today. Like everybody else, he has done districts in West Bengal. He is a literature graduate, did his post-graduation in political science, and also did an MBA from abroad. Having served in the districts in West Bengal, he has specialized in, 5 major departments, and for a very, very long time in all, I would say. He is being in charge of the Department of Personnel, both in his state cadre and in the center. He has had very long stints in industries and commerce and agriculture, which he did both in the state. And my second time when I met him was in the center when he was joint secretary and had transitioned from being joint secretary in the food processing department to horticulture. And I still remember a conversation we had with him on the GMOs. And I think that was a fantastic conversation. And I very fondly remembered it this year when we did a workshop on GMO. And we recalled you in January 2020. So that is Sir's little background. And with those words, I once again welcome Sir. And we will now straight away jump into our conversation, getting to know a little bit of the man behind the officer. So, sir, we'd like to know a little bit before you joined the services in the year 1985. We are given to understand that you were toying with the idea of being a journalist. And I think it flows from your educational background. And in a way, it has come full circle that you have carried that passion of being creative, not just by writing this book, but also by being the honorary curator of one of the most famous and well-known and well-institutionalized and organized literature and arts festival called the Valley of Words, which is held in Dehradun every year. We will talk more about that, sir, but a little bit about your pre-entry into the UPSC and how life has come full circle for you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mugdha. In fact, I was still doing my master's in history. See, let me just go back a little further into this. You see that till 1979, before the Kothari Commission stepped in, you just had to be 20 years old to join the IPS. And because my father was in the BSF and was very fond of his uniform, and I was also very fond of seeing him, and I like the style of living in a cantonment and spit and polish and everything. So I was quite keen to join the IPS. And at that point of time, for the IPS, you had to be 20 years old and you just had to clear one paper. There were many sets of papers. Before 1979, the IAS exam was very different. So you had different exam for the IPS, you had additional papers for the IAS and so on and so forth. So I thought, let me just finish my BA honors in English and I'll sit for the IPS. And that is it. I mean, life is made, so I'll do my horses and my polo and life would be set. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I think fortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately for me, the Kothari Commission recommendations about the change of the UPSC pattern of examinations stepped in. And therefore, I had to look at another subject. So I picked up history. So I took my master's in history after doing my literature. And then somehow the other, while studying history, I decided and felt that, one has to see how history is being made. So one wanted to be part of the contemporary setting of how history is made. And therefore, I no longer wanted to be a civil servant. And at the age of 20, this opening came up in the Times of India as trainee journalist. So I applied and I was fortunate to get into Times of India. At that time, I was in my 21st year. I mean, I'd not completed 21 by that time. So first 3.5 years, I was in the media. And 2 years into Times of India, I realized that, journalism is not, journalists are there at the sort of periphery, they don't really get to, so it's a very idealized sort of a profession. Very few people get access to meeting the top leadership and things. A lot of it is very grunt work. I was fortunate, I enjoyed that work also, but around 83, 84, a lot of colleagues in the office were taking the civil services examination. And my father was very keen that I take up this the civil services examination. So he sort of once challenged me and said that, it's so easy. In fact, I remember when my leader articles would come in the Economic Times at age 22, 23, and I showed it to my father. He says, "Ye kya hai? I mean, if there is dum hai, to crack this exam." And I said, he says, "You crack it and then you can leave it." So that's how he tempted me, or sort of cajoled me, or sort of, he sort of got me into a phase where he challenged me. He says, "Can you do it?" I said, "What the hell? What do you think? I can't do it? I can do it." And that's how the journey to the IAS started. When I started preparing, then I realized that I had little time, because didn't have the luxury of taking the exam many times over. So I decided to take the examination with philosophy and anthropology, because these were much shorter subjects in content. And from then on, the journey to the IAS began. But these 2 or 3 years in the media were also very good, in the sense that one got an idea of how fallible people are. How fallible politicians are, how fallible very senior officers are. And, so that big hawa about, a secretary or about a minister, that disappeared. So that normal, dar, what we call, or the sort of thing that you have that youngsters nowadays feel when they talk to a collector or somebody. I mean, part of it wasn't there because my father was in the services, but the other part disappeared. I mean, that the fear of the politician or the fear of the leader, that went, and one was able to engage in a frank conversation. One also realized in the media that if you do your homework well, then you can engage in intelligent conversations with anyone and everyone. And being in the media also taught me that it is not very difficult to get a general overview in about 3 to 4 hours, if you have the material at your command. And I must tell you, you see that before all this Wikipedias and all this internet came into being, the way information was organized in the newspaper offices. In fact, there used to be big folders and big files where newspaper cuttings used to be there on a particular subject of all newspapers in the world. And therefore, you had if you were working on, say, suddenly, you were asked to work on, I was seconded to the Economic Times, and if you had to work on a trade deal with Russia or on Russian foreign policy, you would already have a lot of material available. So what you require, therefore, both as a good journalist and as a good administrator, is the ability to look at information holistically and then connect the dots. I think that is what I learned from the world of media, and that's helped me a lot during my more than 3.5 decades in the IAS now.
No, that's very relevant, sir. Connecting the dots is something that holds true for the media and for an officer. So just taking on from what you've said, did you ever get to interact as a journalist pre your UPSC with any administrator? Did you have any kind of interesting anecdotes of where you interviewed anybody, or where you did a story involving bureaucrats? Any record of those times?
No, I would say that, you see, we would have fairly good interactions with the then joint secretaries of the industries, labor department, and others in their press conference and things. I remember going there, and among the names that I would recall would be Mr. Sani, Mr. K.M. Sani, I would recall his name, and a few others, but not really people who were controversial as such. I mean, these were interacting with people at press conferences, right? So one was too junior. I mean, what was I? I was a trainee journalist in that period, so I would tag along with the seniors for their press conferences and things. So I mean, no, I was not. It's like, I was barely out of my probation in the Times of India before I made this transition, right? So that's not. I mean, I won't have much recall of. I would know that yes, there were press conferences and we would meet people and talk to them.
So tell us something, sir, about your own probation days and how the academy was in your times, how the syllabus was, what you liked doing, what was good about the academy, how was the food in the mess, how was the stay in the hostel, how were your own deputy directors and the directors, and now that you are back on the hot seat, What is it that in your last 1.5 years of being in the academy and also emanating from your own experience as a probationer, what have you changed, or what kind of changed, if any, brought about as the director of the academy, sir?
You see, there are three phases that I have been in the academy. I've been in the academy as a probationer, then, as you recall, I was in the academy as a deputy director, and I am now the director of the academy. Let's talk about these three phases. You see, one of the one of the things which I want to share is, you see that back then people were not posted to the academy because they wanted to be posted to the academy. So that is one fundamental change which I saw from 1985 to 1995. By 1995, we were being asked, would you like to join the academy? And only those who wanted to join the academy were in the academy. So I think that's a very big change from 1985 to 1995, and which has continued. And the credit for that would go to the leadership at that time, Dr. Saxena and the others who were able to build. I mean, it was the faculty. The deputy directors became the core and the center of life in the academy, as was there in your time. Remember the play we did on you? I still can't get over your name. Can I share it with everyone, or can I not share it with everyone?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we used to do a play. We named her Rugda Jinnah. In that play to match with her name Mugdha Sinha. But anyway, so coming back to 1985. You see, 1985, we must understand that the academy was passing through a very bad time in the 80s, and therefore, I think that is what has the joy, the cheer, the verve, the celebration that we now call the academy was not there in my times. But let me explain the reasons for that, because you see, in 1982, Mr. P.S. Appu, the then director, had taken a very firm stand against an officer who had brandished a gun at a lady probationer during the during the village visit. Now, he had recommended the dismissal of this officer trainee, then called a probationer, but the government did not accept the dicta or the view of the director. As a result of it, the director put in his papers. Now, when the director put in his papers in 1982, because the government did not back him for taking action against an officer who brandishes a gun at his lady colleague, you can imagine the sort of impact it would have had on the other faculty and on the other probation. They would have felt that you can get away with blue murder. So I think that one incident put back the academy it really shook the academy, because I mean, nobody would take a stand. I mean, today, if the director says something, I know fully well that the DOPT would back me up so completely, right? And that unless that happens, unless the director has that sort of and that confidence has to come from day to day, from the day-to-day things that we do. Look, frankly, the director is part of the DOPT, and we have to work in tandem. But if there are very strong views of issues of indiscipline and something, if that is tolerated, if that's tolerated in a setting which I would say was very, very 40 years ago, was a very feudal society, was a very feudal mindset, where it was considered, okay, theek hai, kuch kara to nahi. Now, can you imagine that sort of a situation today? Can you imagine that happening to any one of my colleagues here today? I mean, I would make mincemeat out of that. He won't even think of it. I mean, the whole thought wouldn't happen. That was one. Then, to add to this, we had this major fire in 1984, which destroyed the physical aspects of the academy. Nobody was very keen to come here. And therefore, our probation days were what we did with ourselves. I mean, so it's not, we had a great time. We had an absolutely great time. There's no doubt about it. We have a great time because you are young at that time. And therefore, any group of young people, when they are together, they are bright, they are intelligent, and they're happy. They just cracked a very tough exam. So it was a nice thing. I enjoyed my stay. I was in this Mahanadi hostel. I enjoyed my horse riding. I had a very good group of friends. Very good. Dada Banerjee was a very distinguished counselor for me. So we had some very good faculty members as well. But that sort of feeling which you got in 1994 as a combined, comprehensive academy faculty working together, sharing meals, sharing camaraderie, that was not as strong in those days. But having said that, it was a great time. So from then on, I think the transition started when Mr. B.N. Yugandhar took over as the director of the academy. Mr. Yugandhar took over as the director of the academy. He brought to the academy gravitas, and he brought to the academy funds. I mean, because you can't do anything unless you have good infrastructure, right? So this entire infrastructure that you see now around the academy, in fact, today it's the director's office and the Shalwell and the reception. These are the only symbols of the old era. So you have new Dhruv Shila, as I see Dhruv Shila. Dhruv Shila had come up in your times, was coming up in your times perhaps. And this Gyan Shila, the Gyan Shila was not there in your time, but this Karam Shila was there. Kalindi came up in your time. So gradually the infrastructure of the academy started improving. With the infrastructure of the academy improving, then what happened was that the academy had its own research centers, which Mr. Yugandhar had started, taken on very successfully, then by Dr. Saxena, then by Dr. Habibullah, then by Mr. Batswan, then Habibullah. So after that, the academy has been on a curve, which is on which academy has been improving in terms of its academic resources, in terms of physical infrastructure, and therefore today it's one of the finest places to be in the country or anywhere.
So I also suggest, after hearing you on this question, that you should also consider, after you finish your first book, another book on capturing the history of the academy, because I think you'll do a very good job of it. So, that was very interesting.
So we do have a coffee table book. I'll show it to you. So I'll just get me the coffee table book. I'll just show it to you. We have on the 60th year. Idhar padi hai isme. We yoga karmasu kaushlam. Udhar last row mein udhar computer ke niche. Okay, so you must give me some breathers. Now you ask so many questions. I need to take my water. Huh?
Yeah,
now you talk for 2-3 minutes.
Surely, sir. So, in fact, I want to compliment you and also want to inform our lovely audience that a very nice video of the 2019 probationers based out of LBSNA, which covers all the facets of LBSNA, including the wonderful infrastructure that we have, has come out, and it is in fact gone viral because it's very beautifully shot and captures everything that the Trainee Academy does. And I felt very, very nostalgic watching that. So many compliments to you, sir, for that also, because it is actually helping in outreach and, breaking this whole, accessibility barrier between the civil society and the civil servants. Because there's always a lot of, anxiety about, post entry into the UPSC as to how one is trained. And also there is a lot of curiosity and jigyasa. And to tell you, sir, there's a lot of people who are aspiring civil servants who have joined us today, either through the various coaching centers or through the book loving audience that we have. A lot of people whose children are interested, and the parents and the children, because of the lockdown, are watching it together with us. Sir, we live in the post-COVID times where a lot has changed in terms of how the public views the civil service today. And it is for the first time that almost every pillar of society, be it the political executive, be it the civil society, in fact, even the media, who has been our very, very vocal critique, has for the first time been very, very appreciative. And in fact, from various streams, including the social media, one has heard good things about the Corona warriors, how when everybody else was in lockdown, it was the civil servants, including the health workers, the municipal staff, the collectors, the uniformed police people, the personnel who were out there fighting for us. How does it feel, and I'm told by one of your junior colleagues, and we were having a conversation yesterday, that when he was doing his, I think, second phase of training, there was this whole, group of people who had asked you that, how is it that, the bureaucracy has changed? There is so much of political pressure. And you went back after that little conversation and actually held a class for all the officer trainees and explained to them. So I think this is a good time to ask you that question, because we are in the phase where the interaction between the civil society and the civil servants because of COVID is making a change for the better. And this platform also, sir, incidentally, is a platform which tries to do exactly this: open up the civil service to the civil society, is a platform for informal interaction, so that that chasm that exists between us and them, which maybe more perceptive than it otherwise may be, will has been getting broken as we have been doing these events where we have lot of interest from the civil society. In fact, we have more members of the civil society joining us than probably our own brethren being here. So how do you see these changing times, and how do you see the future of the public service, especially when we talk of downsizing? Because I was a product of the downsizing batch. We were only 52, and today, when I come back to the academy, I see there are more than 300 only members of the Indian Administrative Service, apart from the civil service as a whole. So how do you see this whole thing of minimum governments and maximum governance, especially in the post-COVID or the times as we emerge from the COVID times, sir?
Mugdha, you've asked too many questions. Okay. First of all, I think it's a great change from your times to now, in the sense that this year we had 58 lady officer trainees. And they also made a film called The 58, which I don't know whether you've seen that 58, that film 58?
No.
You haven't seen it? Okay, I'll just send it to you. This is short snippets from each of the 58 lady officer trainees. So we had, courage. We gave a feature to all of them: courage, confidence, poise, beauty, grace, charm, confidence. So it's a very nice movie which I'll share with you. So it's also, I think that also became quite viral. I'm surprised why you haven't seen it. So I'll show you that. Now you see the question that had come up in phase 3 was about the interface between the IAS officer and the political leadership and the civil society. You see, in fact, another change that I would say that from my times to your times to now is that, you see, we were told that, look, the politician is a big no-no. You can't really talk to him. He's different. You are different. So we were trying to divide the world into very neat compartments. This is the work of the collector. This is the work of the minister. This is the work of the municipal corporation. This is the work of this. This is the work of civil society. This is where you don't even step into. This is a subject you don't touch. You don't talk about transgenders. You don't talk about sex workers. I mean, they don't exist, right? So that was the world in 1985. In 1985, let's take anything like transgenders. 1985, could you have imagined a transgender even entering the academy? I mean, today a transgender is welcome to the academy as a resource person. Now that is a major shift. And I think that's, so what was happening was that we were told in our times, and perhaps because the leadership then, you still had ICS officers in those days, they felt that, this is their job, this is the job. So there was a watertight compartment, perceived watertight compartment in theory. So in practice, you hobnobbed. And in theory, you were told that you maintain, a separate, sort of thing. So it was a very muddled kind of an approach. By 95, if you remember, some of our faculty members gave you the impression that, look, we are the knights in the shining armor. We are the bright young people who will save the country from all the wretched goons around us. Now, these are the sort of things which have created an unnecessary tension between the civil servant and the political leadership that you work with. Now, fortunately, and I think that's partly to do with the way I grew up, with the fact that I was also involved in student union movement and things. One realized quite early in life that this binary which we create between the good bureaucrat and the ugly politician, that binary does not exist. There are good people in every profession, and there are bad people everywhere. There are good teachers, there are bad teachers, there are good IAS officers, there are bad IAS officers, there are good IPS officers, there are excellent IPS officers, and there are useless IAS officers. I mean, just because a person makes it to the IAS doesn't make him I mean, he doesn't get a new halo around his head, and he suddenly doesn't wake up with the Delphic oracle around him that he'll now be pure wisdom, he or she would be pure wisdom. So I think what I have realized in 30 years is that one should be able, one has to accept that governance, especially large public systems can only be managed when you collaborate and cooperate. So both these elements of, collaboration and cooperation, they have to go together. Now, if somebody, and you have to be able to make your point of view across in a manner which does not cause offense to the other person. And I think this is one of the problems which a lot of our colleagues have, that, if you do not agree with the viewpoint of the political leadership, you have to put your point of view across. And unless you are being asked to do something unconstitutional, I mean, go ahead and, find a way to sort of sort it out. So I think this whole thing that I must stand on, I mean, look, as long as the political leadership is elected in a democratic and a fair manner, and we are all working for so many, you're working for a Congress government. I mean, the academy and the DOPD, this works under the BJP regime. I worked for the Trinamool Congress in West Bengal. Before that, there was the CPM regime in West Bengal. So all of us will get to work with different political disposition. As long as you are very clear, and as long as you are in a position to deliver or to provide the best options that are available, so I think the relationship and the rapport would be very good. Coming back to the first point that you made about our role as frontline warriors, you see, and especially when you compare the situation in the USA, I think one of the good things has been that it's been very easy for all of us to collaborate with each other because we all know each other. This network of the IAS and the IPS and all the services put together has been actually very good in getting solutions across. I mean, for instance, if for instance, I mean, formally that matter never had to be. I'll give you a very small example. I mean, there were some Bengali tourists who were stranded in Bageshwar and Almora and all these places. So it did not even require an interaction between the CS and CS of two states. It required just an interaction between batchmates at the level of the district. So a problem of interstate, pan-India collaboration could be handled by people with 7 to 10 years of seniority. In any other system, it would have had to be escalated to the very top. For example, in the USA, I mean, how would Florida and say New Jersey or Houston and something else, how would Texas and they collaborate? It's at the level of the governor, right? So there are no institutions below that. So here in India, COVID was handled because it was handled by very young officers, 7 to 10 years of service across the IAS and the IPS, who all knew each other. And if he did not know somebody, Mugdha doesn't know somebody, Mugdha's friend would know somebody, your batchmate would know somebody, or your senior would know somebody. So that's how things were sorted out, right? And then we had this lovely platform, Karuna, civil services, all coming together with income tax and ordnance factories and railways, everybody coming together. I mean, the thought of, using the rail coach factory to make PPEs and to make ventilators, it emerged from this because we are used to collaboration. I think that's a very important lesson that all of us have learned this time, that so far we were learning to collaborate within ourselves and with ourselves. This time the problem was so huge and so immense that we also had to reach out to civil society. Let me also say that there was a reluctance on the part of some of us to first reach out to civil society. We would ideally want to do everything ourselves. We reach out only when we cannot, and that's human nature. You see, as long as you can do the thing yourself, you will not want to reach out. So this corona has also taught us that in fact, when you look at the hierarchy of corona, you also understand in a philosophical sense the difference between an endemic, an epidemic, and a pandemic. So an endemic would require local solutions, an epidemic would require regional solutions, but a pandemic would require global collaboration, and therefore you would require large public systems to handle.
So we are very happy to share with you that your batchmates, Mr. J.C. Mohanty and Madam Mohanty, have also joined the chat, and they have written something very beautiful about you, which I want to share not just with you, but with our audience. This is batchmate to batchmate, and he says, Sanjeev has been a role model of a batch of 1985 in many ways. His talk evokes sweet memories. From having been a probationer, he is now a worthy Director General. So congratulations, sir. You are being watched by batchmates and your probationers and everybody.
JC is such a dear friend, and such a lovely recall for both JC and his wife. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Sir. So, since we are doing this very nostalgic journey, and also in the post-COVID times, we have seen, as you rightly mentioned, the collaboration between the various pillars of democracy, including the civil society. It might just be a right time to also ask you this question, because you are also, writing and mapping the Indian states. When we talk of the states, we also talk of what is known as the relations between the center and the state, because we have a federal unitary kind of a system, and you come from a very special state, the state of West Bengal. So before I take you to how the journey began post your stint as a probationer.
Yeah. I was telling you about West Bengal. You see, West Bengal has the unique distinction of opposing anything and everything. Sardar Patel called a meeting in 1946, in fact, precisely on the 21st and 22nd of October, to discuss on whether the ICS, what should be the successor to the ICS, whether we should have a successor service to the ICS, whether it should be a state service or this or that or that. So can you imagine that out of the 11 provinces which were there at that time, there were 3 provinces which opposed the ICS. And the first, of course, was West Bengal, which said, Bengal, at that time, Bengal, which said, no, you don't want the ICS. The second was Punjab. The third was Sindh. And the fourth was Assam, said that we are not very decided. So, I mean, the fact that I come from an interesting state is true, because Bengal has always believed in putting, in making its presence felt. Let's put it like this. The politically correct statement would be that Bengal has always made its presence felt. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
No. So, okay, now that you've answered the question without even me having to ask the question, because I think the moment you mention West Bengal, it evokes this kind of an answer. So, thank you very much. We'd like to see the book on your table.
No, the book on my table is this. This is Karmasu Kaushalam. This is Excellence in Action. And I'll be sending you a copy for your lovely curation for today's session. Now, this is a book which is a coffee table book which we brought out last year on the 60th year of the Academy. And let me, I don't know whether your viewers will be able to see it. So it's got...
So is it available for the general public to buy?
Yes, it is. Right now, the souvenir shop is closed, but as soon as the souvenir shop is opened up, I'll let you know, and then they can send their check or their DD to this. So this has got, this of course has got the pictures, and also a very interesting thing. This entire premises of the Academy was purchased for less than 4 lakh rupees. This entire Shalwell campus was purchased for 4 lakh rupees, and the parliamentarian said that you spent a lot of money on this. Can you imagine? I mean, how value of money has changed over a period of time. So these are some very interesting snippets from those times. And in fact, the reason why this came here again was that, you see, Mussoorie was a very, very British and a very Anglo-Indian town, and almost all the residents had left this place, and property prices were crashing, and there was no employment. And so Govind Ballabh Pant, who was then the Home Minister, Chief Minister at that time of UP, later the Home Minister, so he was very keen that, there should be some economic activity that should happen in the hills. And that's how we came here. Whatever the reasons, we are so glad that we are here and not in any other place, including Rajasthan, which is very beautiful, but not as cool as Mussoorie is.
Yes, Rajasthan did for many, many years host the first police academy at Mount Abu, which later got shifted, I think, and became the Sardar Patel Academy in Hyderabad, as we know it now. So going back, and I am deliberately taking you back to West Bengal, from the cooler climes of Mussoorie, both literally and metaphorically. to West Bengal to look at how you negotiated your early part of the service in West Bengal. We'd like you to speak a little bit about your stint as district collector and magistrate in the provinces that you did in West Bengal. And also, I'm interested in personally knowing whether your skills or experience as a journalist pre or UPSC made it easy for you in negotiating in a tough state like West Bengal with the journalists there who could be very nosy at times. Did it help? Did you brandish your pen and say, "See, I know it. Like I've done this before, and like I know it." Did you do that? A little bit
No,
about.
but
Yeah.
okay, let me say something.
Did you also have the English August Upamanya Chatterjee kind of moments in West Bengal in your initial days? We like to hear total stories, so very frankly.
Right. You see, I was very fortunate because I was posted to Purulia district to begin with, and both my ADMs, like me, were from JNU. So there were three of us from JNU, and only the collector was not from JNU. So poor collector, I mean, he had a tough time with three people from JNU with him. So it was his problem, it was not our problem. So I had a great time, because we were all sort of from the same institute. And then, it makes a lot of difference. And you have people you've been, they were, of course, much senior to me in JNU. And I'd like to especially acknowledge Mr. Rath. He's now the chairman of NDTV. And both he and Mrs. Rath, we had a great time. Well, sort of English August moment in the sense that I spent a lot of time with them and played a lot of Scrabble with Mrs. Rath and learned to lose very gallantly from her. And my other ADM was Mr. B.L. Meena. He was also from JNU, so I had a great time with both of them. And then, you see, in that time, the GNLF agitation was at its peak. And another JNU alumni, Mr. D.P. Patra, was also the batchmate of Mr. So they were all 1977, 79 batch. They were then in the district. So when I was doing my settlement camp in Alipurduar, so then he asked that, they were looking for people to come and work in Darjeeling district because situation was very, very tense. In fact, that's where my tryst with ideas of understanding how states are made, linguistic issues, ethnic issues came to the fore. So I was inducted into the Darjeeling district administration, one of the rare cases where your district gets changed because of the political situation. And I was in Darjeeling for a fairly long period after that as BDO Kalimpong, as SDO Kalimpong, then as ADM of Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority and a milk cooperative. So I spent the first few years of my life was spent in Darjeeling district and Cooch Behar, which is the neighboring district from there. So these are not districts where the CPM influence was very strong. So these were still cast in a different mold, to say. And Darjeeling was because it was totally law and order. So, the relationship with the journalist is also very interesting. When you have all the information and the journalist does not have any, he is in a way dependent on you for information feeds. When he has more information about you, then you are hiding from him. So it's a question of who has the information, in whose favor is the information symmetry. So journalists being the same, the same journalist would approach very differently in a Darjeeling type situation or in a COVID type situation because he or she is dependent on you for information. In another situation, when there are major projects or various things, or you have a lot of rivals around you, they are feeding the journalist about you. So then the equation changes. Then the journalist perhaps has more information about you than you have about your own office, right? So then the equation changes. So it's a question of which side. Information is power. It has always been power, but in this digital age, it is even more power. Now, I must say that, having been a journalist was very helpful to me because a lot of media, I think, were more partial to me. They would give me a better story than most others. In fact, the most interesting is, I had a little, there was an issue in Murshidabad where it was about the cutting of trees, and it was about the valuation of trees and about the process, and I had issued some orders, banning the cutting of trees. And so my erstwhile colleagues in the Times of India, they brought out a cartoon in 1995, and the cartoon shows there's a big tree and there's a minister with an axe trying to cut the tree, and there's the collector, standing there and said, "Thou shalt not cut the tree." So that cartoon did a lot for me. I mean, that cartoon, it was not an editorial comment, but it was a cartoon which tilted the whole balance in my favor. And suddenly I found that, half the politicians were still not very clear on which side to turn. After that cartoon appeared, then it was picked up by, unfortunately, the English press has a much greater influence than in terms of the readership. So even if there are only 100 copies of Times of India being sold in Murshidabad, it has a different dynamic. And then a lot of smaller newspapers, regional newspapers pick up from there. So the reproduction of that cartoon in the local Bengali press, that saved the day for me. In the sense that, the saved the day. What is going to happen? I mean, I was moved to ultimately after 6 months, I was transferred out. I was very fortunate because I came to the academy after that. So no regrets about that. But in terms of public perception, yes, I think if you have a good rapport, then it does make a difference. And having worked with them in the past certainly gives you a heads up.
So there's a very esteemed member in our audience, sir, a senior retired IAS officer, Mr. Anurag Bhatnagar, and he is asking you a question. How did you cope with the leftist government which doesn't trust the bureaucracy? I thought since we were talking of your times in West Bengal and you were posted in districts which was not really the leftist district, probably because they thought that you came from JNU, was they didn't want a kind of a connivance at that level, probably. So they deliberately posted you elsewhere. Do you think that could have been the reason?
I think, let me again explain that. You see, and I'll be very frank and quite clear about it. You see, the main conflict in Bengal with the bureaucracy was in the first. Left front had many phases in Bengal. And the first phase, 77 to 82, was perhaps the phase where the officers bore the brunt of it, right? Because they'd never worked together. You see, there is nothing better for a bureaucracy than a status quoist party, right? And when any party wants to be in power second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, there are changes that happen in the very ecosystem of that party also. You see, there's a lot of difference when you're in the opposition, when you actually begin to rule, because there is a logic of rulership. There's a DNA of rulership, right? And and in fact, this it's so clear. So by the time I had joined, and especially when I had out of the experience of especially after that GNLF experience, during GNLF, for example, the political leadership was so dependent on the bureaucracy, because the entire GNLF movement, the handling of that was done entirely by the bureaucracy. I mean, Mr. Patra was there from the IAS, Mr. Handa was there from the IPS, and I can tell you the names of all of us who were involved. I was there, Mr. Basudev Banerjee, who later became Chief Secretary, Mr. Pachnanda, who's now currently the serving chairman of the Haryana Public Service Commission. He was there. So I mean, we were all there. So working day and night, trying to get this thing out. So it was a very different thing. I agree with you that, and to respond to Mr. Bhatnagar, I think the experiences of those who were posted in the hardcore CPM districts may have been very, very different than my experience, because I was posted first in North Bengal, where the whole of the CPM was tenuous, to say, because it was the Forward Bloc and the RSP and the GNLF, which were far more powerful, and therefore it was a contest. So whenever there's a contest, you can find a way to wriggle out of that. So I don't know how I would respond had things been different, but my only thing is that, look, as long as you don't find, I mean, there is no contradiction or no conflict. I mean, I don't see a conflict between a local minister who wants his name on the local Sanskrit college. So let him have it. What's your problem in that? So I think, and this was taught to me by one of my erstwhile colleagues, and a very important district magistrate, Mr. Balachandran. He taught me, he says, look, the political executive has a different revenue model, and you have a different revenue model. He has to run a race for 5 years, and he is desperate to win that race for 5 years. Our race is for 35 years and beyond. So the strategy for a sprinter and the strategy for a long distance runner have to be very different. So as long as you're not in conflict with your immediate political leadership, I mean, how does it matter? I mean, how does it matter? I mean, now that I look back, I had a fight with the minister. I don't even know his name. Perhaps if I recall, I'll know his name. But how does it matter? I have to live my life with my peers. I must be true to my conscience. I must be true to myself, and I must be true to the world around me. I have to protect my BDOs, my SDOs, my policemen, my ICDS officer, my health worker. As long as I'm not letting the main conflict that happens, Mugdha, is about when we are young, like you still are. I mean that wish to to do this and do that is there, and that's what I keep telling the youngsters now, that you do your work. Let anybody else take the credit. It doesn't matter to us. We have to be more concerned about the work. Is our work getting done? If the work is getting done, it doesn't matter who gets the credit for it, because our credit is being built into little systems, into little accretions are happening to us. We are learning every day, and that's that learning which will take us, which will hold us in our stead. And if you have an open mind, look, let's also understand. Most people who join the CPM or the RSS or the BJP or the Congress, they just join. I mean, they're not really very, very clear about why they have joined. I mean, a lot of them want, and the other thing is that it is legitimate to want political power. There is nothing wrong about it. If a politician wants to be popular, if he wants to be active in his constituency, if he wants to get up every day in the morning and listen to complaints for 18 hours a day, I mean, good luck to him and good luck to his constituents. Why not? So where is the grudge point? The grudge point comes in where, and that again is a point. The problem happens because a lot of times our political leadership knows more about our area than we do. They are more aware of the problem than we do. And it's a question of information. It's a question of knowing information. See, three things are there. If you have all information about your area, if you have all the information about the funds that you have, if you have all the information about the money that you can spend and the guidelines that you are in offer, you can have a very nice, very candid conversation over a cup of tea, coffee. And one of the things which I must say, at no point of time should your dialogue break. Your dialogue should not break. And your dialogue should not break with the ruling party. It should not break with the opposition party. You are doing a job. We are doing a professional job. And whenever there's good political leadership, they will want us to do well, because if we do well, the political leadership gains. Look, if the academy does well, I mean, the DOPT gets the credit. I mean, the minister gets the credit. The prime minister gets the credit. I mean, so where's the problem in that, right?
I think I loved what you said about how you defined the difference in the aspirations of the political executive and the executive, that is the bureaucracy. By mentioning that rat race everybody is running, where the bureaucrats are the marathon runners and the political executive probably is a sprint runner. So very beautifully said, sir. Very, very true also. And I've also found it in my own life in the service, that while I have had some of the most, difficult dissenting kind of strives with the political executive, but I've always ended up working with them, be it in the chief minister's office or be it, at the union level. So, I think the politicians, somehow I also feel, having worked for over 20 years now, that because of their 5-year stint, they are somewhere, they make for better human beings in the long term. They understand you better. So when I came back from the center to the state, the very people hired had fights with in the districts, had very nice things to say about me. And I was wondering, have they forgotten in the 5 years? That kind of a thing. So you're absolutely right, sir. The conversation should not break. And as we carry our conversation forward, sir, we would like to step out, bring you back from the hot Amphan kind of a cyclonic kind of a West Bengal situation to better times and to Dehradun and to talk about your Valley of Words, sir. Before we talk about the book, sir, I think that aspect also needs to be covered. But before I do, sir, a very small factual request has come from a gentleman called Amit Gemawat. And he says, sir, when will the FC start this year? I think you can answer it anxieties. I think he's a probationer. He's a successful candidate.
I think his interview, because the interviews are going to resume on the 15th of July, because the interviews for the UPSC, that's going to be restarting in the month of July. So certainly it cannot start in August. It can't start in the last week of August as has been happening traditionally. So I would expect a delay of at least 4 to 6 weeks. At least 4 weeks delay would be there, and we'll try to cover it up later on. So I don't expect the FC to start till the middle of September at least, because there will be a delay, right? So the government and the UPSC but what we are doing this time is there'll be some high court training. So there'll be some online training that will start even before the FC starts. So all the successful candidates will have a link with the academy. Certainly, as soon as the results are announced and within a week or 10 days of the results being announced, we'll be able to offer some online training for the successful candidates.
So I think
okay, now back to this. So I also wanted to share with you. You see that I have not spent a lot of time in this place. So after my stint in the academy, I worked in Uttarakhand government for 5 years. You see, because what happened was that these were new states, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh were new states, and the government of India wanted officers between 6 to 16 years of seniority to join these states. I was just short of completing that 16-year, Rubicon when the call came from the government of Uttarakhand. So I moved into Uttarakhand. I spent 5 years there. So in all, I have not spent a lot of time in Bengal, but I have spent a lot of very good time in Bengal, and very educative, very learning. And the conventional opinion about, or the impression about Bengal, even for probationers, has been that it's a tough state. But let me tell you, it's a very cool state. There's no real problem about Bengal. And also the fraternity and the fellowship really improves. The fellowship and the fraternity really improves when you're working in difficult circumstances. Okay. Now, you see, Value of Words started 4 years ago, and it started because I used to attend a lot of literature festivals in Calcutta, Kasauli, and a lot of places, and I used to be invited for various talks and things. And after, in Calcutta, we have two very good festivals, the APJ Kalam, APJ Litfest, which is held on the Park Street, and then there's one which is done by Tata Steel, which is done in the Victoria Memorial. So in both these places, I used to be invited. I used to go there. And in one of those after-event parties, one of the key sponsors of these festivals said that, why don't you be the festival director next year for the Calcutta Festival? So I was very happy. I said, yes, let's do it. But then Rashmi, my better half, she counseled me and said that you're going to be putting in a lot of energy and a lot of effort into Calcutta. Do you plan to stay there? Do you plan to, retire in Calcutta? I'm not going to be in Calcutta. Because our home is Dehradun. That's where we've decided to settle. So if we have to do it, why not do it in Dehradun? So why not do it in a city which is where you're going to superannuate, and you need to do something after you superannuate, because otherwise, life can be very difficult after super. Because if you don't have much creative things to do, and the mind, interestingly, sort of doesn't seem to slow down. So that's when the thought came that if you have to do something, if one has to do something on that scale, why not do it in Dehradun? In any case, Dehradun did not have a literature festival of that scale and that size. So that's how, the first sponsorship came in almost, they said that already, you do the festival. So then we thought, let's do it. So then we had a little group of friends, and it was initially called the Delta, the Dehradun Literature and Arts Festival. But then, and in fact, the initial thought that was, that we have so many good writers in Dehradun, from, I. Allen Seeley and Ruskin Bond and Ganesh Shaili and Leeladhar Jaguri and so many people here. But then, when we had a core group meeting, then it was felt that you cannot do a festival based on local authors, because how many years can you listen to Ruskin Bond? You can listen to Ruskin Bond year 1, year 2, year 3. After that, what? So then we thought that, why are we confining ourselves to the word Dehradun? It is a valley. So then the word, a colleague, a friend of mine, Kishore Menon, he came out with this word, Value of Words. So we liked it. The title is very good. So that's how it started. And then we thought that, you know, every festival must bring something which is from that area, which is local. So everywhere you have, you see, you will have, there is a core structure to a literature festival, which is contemporary books in English and Hindi and one of the regional languages. That is the core which everybody will have it. So whether it is Jaipur or Kasauli or the Hayes Festival or, you know, Karachi Festival or whatever festival, this will be there. There'll be, you know, 10 English books and 10 Hindi books, and there'll be a poetry cafe, and there'll be conversations, and there'll be a play put in, and there'll be a drama put in, there'll be a musical performance. So we thought, and then I felt that, you know, Dehradun is the center for the IMA that, and in fact, I'd gone to the POP today. It's the center for strategic thought in the country, or at least ought to be the center for strategic thought in the country. It's also the place for the FRI. It's also the place where the Wadia Institute is there. It's also the place where the Wildlife Institute of India is there. So we thought that why not have something which is connected to Himalayan ecology, Himalayan livelihoods, Himalayan ecosystems, and why not also use this forum to showcase the Himalayan states at a common platform. So that's how the concept of one knowledge vertical, which has to do with lives, livelihoods, and the Himalayan ecology came up. And it's also a tribute to my former mentor and Chief Secretary, R.S. Tolia, the legendary Chief Secretary of Uttarakhand. So we decided to name that vertical under him. And then we had this military history and strategy, because we have such a lot of retired generals, admirals, Air Force people. I mean, they sit and chat, and, you know, if you sit with them in the evening, they have, and that's another reason to go back to MAP. I mean, they can discuss every war, every battle, everything in such great detail. So I thought, why not? Let's have a forum for them as well, so they can, you know, rather than sit in their own drawing room and criticize the government and criticize each other, why not bring them all together? And so then we had, and, you know, you have the RIMC here, you have the IMA, you have such a lot of young people wanting to join the army, right? And then the Doon University. So that's how the military history and strategic vertical came up. And of course, we have the Hindi and the English and the poetry and the music and all these things coming up. And then we decided that, you know, one of the major criticisms of literature festivals, including the one in Jaipur, is that it's a bit elitist in its nature. So we decided that we must have a vertical, especially for the Kendriya Vidyalayas. So we decided to have a Kendriya Vidyalaya debate every year. And first year, the debate was that Hindi ne Bollywood ko abad ya barbad kiya hai. So, you know, the subject has to be controversial and it has to be good. So we had very good, you know, participation in that in Hindi and for all Kendriya Vidyalayas. So that's a lot of bubbling enthusiasm, children, you know, and I want... Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas, because see, Doon School and Willems and Asian will come anyway to these literature festivals. We need to make our literature festivals more inclusive. We need to have at least 30 to 40% focus on the on Hindi, and here it is Hindi because that's the main regional language both in this place. So that's how we started. Last year they debated on this on the subject on cricket ne baki khelon ko run out kar diya. You know, so we choose a subject which is interesting and, you know, which evokes debate. Then we also have something called Wow Populi, which is a debate amongst the parliamentarians. And the first year they debated on whether the best debates occur outside the parliament or not. And it was very interesting, you know, because and one of the reasons which came out was so significant, Mugdha. They said that one of the problems in the parliamentary debate is that you are allotted time, not because of what you want to speak, not on the content or not on the knowledge that you have, but the time which your party will get because of the proportion of seats in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha with that, right? Which means that if a person is from a small party and he wants to take part in a debate on, say, Jammu Kashmir, or wants to take part in a debate on reservation policy or on the farmer policy of the country, and he could be a wonderful, he could prepare all his points. But his time will be only 3 to 4 minutes compared to a speaker from a larger party. And that's how, so he said that is one reason why the best debates cannot happen in the parliament, because parliament rations its time, not on the basis of the interest of the person, not on the basis of the information, not on the basis of the comprehensive picture that the person gets, but he gets it on an allocated time. So that's the reason why good debates don't occur within the, and what an insight into this. Last year, we debated on whether English is also an Indian language. And it was a very, very interesting debate because we ultimately came to the conclusion that English is also an Indian language. And as long as the Official Languages Act is there, as long as it is the language of the judiciary, which is 1/3, one of the important tripods of the Constitution, and the language of the Government of India and at least 8 to 9 states in the country, so it is an Indian language. So this is how it's been evolving over a period of time. So we've got a lot of, and this year, I would encourage all of your listeners and you to, I'll send you the link, so you must register for this. This time we're doing it in a hybrid mode, in the sense that because a lot of people will not be able to make it to Dehradun, and also because our resources are limited, because most sponsors will not have that sort of money to spare for sponsorship. So we're doing it in a hybrid mode where the main discussions, there'll be one moderator in Dehradun, with a small audience about, depending on whatever the DM allows at that point of time. So in a hall, there can't be more than, in fact, today at the POP itself, I found that in one tent, you have to have a 5-meter distance, right? So if distancing norms are to be followed, so we'll have that sort of a model this year. And we hope to sort of make that the leitmotif for all literature festivals, where you could be anywhere. So in a way, it is very good, because till last year, we were wanting our shortlisted authors to come here. And if they were abroad, or if they were in Mokokchung or someplace, they were finding it. Now it's much easier. So we'll make use of this technology, and which also means that, we could get you to moderate a session from anywhere, and, do it. So it's technology has actually opened up a lot of opportunities for us. So we hope to leverage those. And already we've got a lot of interests, and a lot of things are coming up for this year's literature festival. We are by the middle of next month, we'll be able to bring out our shortlist and share this with all your listeners. And we do look forward to an institutional partnership with your association for this. So we'll be very happy to have all of you join us in our literature festival.
So thank you very much. Always a man who believes in institutional linkages, and very, very happy I reciprocate, because I also feel team building and institutional linkages are absolutely important. Emerging from what you've said, sir, I was very happy to be invited last year for a poetry session. And I must share this feedback with you, because you spoke about, the literary ambience of Dehradun. From an audience point of view, I must tell you that your festival gets some of the best audiences, because I saw a lot of retired English teachers. The difference between the audience that you get in, say, a Jaipur Literature Festival, of which I have been privy, the kind of audience that we get, we used to get physically in the Techno Hub when we organized these, and the ones that you got, the one at least I was privy to last year. I must compliment you, sir, because I think Dehradun, what you have done is that you have discovered Dehradun exactly as the Britishers probably discovered the hill stations for us, by getting this festival to Dehradun, because of two things. One, Dehradun, in that short span of a day, I discovered that Dehradun has some very nice eating joints, which are designed in a very Mediterranean kind of open to the environment concept. That is one. Where you get the best of people. It has a lot of foreign visitors because of that, its linkages, very, very strategic linkages to Haridwar and to Rishikesh, which has become very popular with foreigners, and also even Mussoorie for that matter, which is more for local tourists. And the best part was a very, very discerning audience. I loved your moderators for all sessions, and the audience is somebody, they were all very, very nicely, dressed, very immaculate. And I think, really interested in being audience in your sessions. And I think that is a culture that Dehradun has, because of, having all the kind of, educational institutes that it has bred for very many years. So I think culturally, Dehradun was probably missing not having a literature festival, and all thanks to you. We have it. I don't think you.
Thanks to my colleagues.
No. So it was great to be there as part of the audience, and look forward to having a virtual connect this year, and good luck for the festival, sir. You have been speaking about language, English language and linguistics. I think just the right moment to take our audiences to that part of the conversation where we'd like you to open up a little bit about your forthcoming book, Mapping of the Indian States, Aspirations, Assertions and Adjustments. And I must say that I really love the way you have titled your book. It is very meaty. It is actually, it incites you. It arouses some kind of curiosity, wanting to read. And I especially liked the little Twitter, thread that you posted on Twitter on Bombay, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. And I'm going to steal this one-liner that you've mentioned in the book because you're going to narrate the story and get our audiences interested. You say something which even I didn't know about my own city, which is a perpetual love affair with Bombay, and also because I was in charge of the Rajasthani labor migrants to Maharashtra. So have been, looks like I've spoken to many people in Maharashtra over the last 2 months. So feels very connected. But I want to read this very beautiful. And I must tell the audiences that, brevity is the wit of the soul. And you've seen Sir speak, but you must read the pieces that he has put out on his Twitter handle, which Sir will share with us. I think succinct, crisp, and very, very enlightening, something that I haven't read in my entire lifetime. And just to give you one example, and I'm taking this away from Sir because I really wanted to, I love this line. Very well-researched book. It says this: Bombay, the hub of India's financial and industrial activity, is the product of Gujarati capital and Maharashtra labor. Wow. I mean, one never thought of it like this. So beautifully said. So might I request you to talk a little bit about how the thought, you've already mentioned it, that your visits to the Survey of India with the probationers gave you the idea.
Is that a printer?
Yeah. So I would also sure, sir. I would request you to talk a little bit about your journey as a writer. Did you have writers' blogs? Then to talk about the content of the books, how you phrased it. And also, since we see there is a lot of connection between the places that you have served, be it Cooch Behar and Rajasthan. So I'd also like you to touch a little bit about the Rajasthan's changing borders, because we have a lot of audiences from Rajasthan who might be interested. And anything else that you think is interesting without revealing too much of the book, because I really look forward to reading the book.
No. Certainly. Thank you so much, Mugdha. And in fact, I'm so glad that you picked up that point about Gujarat, and I deliberately wrote Gujarat as Gujarat because that is how it was spelled at that time. In fact, this time, the what you will see tomorrow is it's actually called All is all well that ends well. Because see, finally, when Maharashtra was created, there were 106 lives lost in Maharashtra, and there were at least 5 lives lost in Gujarat in the Maha Gujarat agitation. So these are things. So again, I was just telling you what you'll be seeing in the next thing. That is, you see that how assertions take place. I mean, how people try to assert and how they finally adjust to whatever they get. But coming back to Rajasthan, I think let me take you to a little bit about Rajasthan, because you see what had happened was that in 1947, for example, if you look at the map of India of 1947, I have this map with me. I don't know whether you won't be able to see it. If you had told me that you want to see maps, I would have taken you to the library where all my maps are displayed. Okay, so in this place, in the first time when when this Rajasthan thing was happening, you see, in Rajasthan you had first you had this Rajasthan Union, which comprised of Udaipur, Madhya Bharat, or the Malwa Union, and this included amongst it Gwalior and Indore, but excluded Bhopal. So this was the first time when this was happening, and the third issue in this article is called the first Hindi map of independent India, in which I'm talking about Rajasthan in greater detail. Because you see, the first time, I mean, till 1952, all maps in India had been printed only in English. And let me also tell you that the Surveyor General's office in Dehradun was actually the first office to have a printing press anywhere. I mean, the first official printing press in the country. And therefore, the first stamps were also printed in Survey of India. The postage stamps that we have, they were also printed in Survey of India. The Constitution of India was also printed in the Survey of India. And the first Hindi map was produced by a person called Colonel Gambhir Singh. He was there. So in this, I'm saying that, you know, we will focus on the Hindi-speaking areas of the state, because Ajmer was also to merge with Rajasthan. I mean, this was in fact the only area. In fact, if you look at the map of Rajasthan, the only little point which was directly under the British rule was this map of Ajmer and Merwara. It was called, you would know better, it was called Ajmer and Merwara. So that was there. And then you see, let me look at this. So what is happening is that a lot of places like Matsya Union, so many other unions which are now part of Rajasthan, were earlier little principalities. So I think the integration of Rajasthan or the making of that into India is one of the most important factors. The other thing to look about Rajasthan, very interestingly, is that after Rajasthan was created and constituted, there has been no change in Rajasthan. There are very few states now left in the country where there are demands for changes within Rajasthan, but Rajasthan as an integrated place, you see, because the other major Hindi-speaking states like UP has been divided between UP and Uttarakhand, Madhya Pradesh got Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, Bihar got divided, and Punjab and Haryana, of course, have been divided many times over. So now Rajasthan is one of those areas which has not had any change in the territorial borders for a very, very long time. And I hope it stays. I mean, I hope it stays for a long time. So this is something interesting about Rajasthan. So what we are doing is that, you see, each time, like for the first chapter was on the map of India in 1947, how the two dominions are divided between India and Pakistan. And in that, it is very interesting to note that the classification used was they clubbed states closest to the British province. Thus, for example, this Tehri Garhwal, which is now right next to us in this place, that was classified with Punjab. It was classified as the Punjab state. Now, it's very interestingly, one of the things which came up when I was going through the debates on the Jammu Kashmir Union Territory status was that the Ladakh Buddhist Association, while complimenting and thanking the government for making Ladakh as a separate union territory, had at that point of time said that why don't you combine Ladakh with the hill states of Punjab? Because they felt that they were closer culturally and in terms of the Buddhist tradition. So can you imagine now, I mean, in retrospect, if that had happened, if we had a really strong Himalayan state, which would have been Ladakh, then Lahaul Spiti, moving this side, and up to Tehri Garhwal. So it would have been a very strong Himalayan state. So now that Himalayan state is actually three distinct places, which is also a point which Dr. Tolia used to make, and which the RS Tolia Forum here is trying to discover, that none of the Himalayan states in this country has had the political depth or the political strength to decide its own destiny. You see, all said and done, as I was telling you earlier, I mean, what impact can an MP from a very small state make? I mean, there is the whole aspect about, UP being so powerful, because UP is powerful because it's got the maximum number of MPs, right? So that was one possibility which got precluded. At that point of time, if we had a very strong, united Himalayan state, then perhaps the logic of development or the determinants of development could have been different. So the third article in the series is on the first Hindi map of India. We've captured the Hindi-speaking states of the country. And in this also, I have shown that, in the 1952 map, the area is marked as China, but Tibet continues to be shown quite prominently in the map of 1952. In 1954, the word Tibet disappears from the Indian map. Now that is a significant part, and that is again linked to the issues that we have with China today, the issues that we're having with at the borders today that we're having. It is also because we never acknowledged. I mean, we were so. I mean, one can't really go back to those times and blame anybody for that reason. But the fact is that when Chow En-lai came to India in 1954, so enamored were we with this friendship and everything that we actually did not bother much, and we did not really pay attention to Tibet at that point of time, because Tibet was never really acknowledged as a part of China. We always acknowledged, in fact, Arunachal and all these places. I mean, the Tawang monastery, where finally Dalai Lama came and stepped in 1959. This monastery used to pay tribute to Tibet. And then in 1951, when the Indian Assam Rifles went to that place, they said, you don't need to give tributes to Tibet. You are very much a part of NEST. So these are all contested boundaries. You see, the way we look at the maps, their maps have a different significance for very populated areas. I mean, where each inch of land is very significant. When we talk about those areas which are high up in the frontiers, because there are very few footprints there, so maps get a very different meaning. So that is how we sort of the China word disappeared from our map at that point of time. So then I talk about how the integration of India took place, especially Mr. Menon. There's a tribute to Mr. Menon. Then what happened was that in 1952, the agitation for a separate Telangana, for a separate Telugu-speaking state that started. Now that movement started because of the conflict between in the erstwhile Madras state, you had the Telugu-speaking people and you had the Tamil-speaking people. And again, the Chennai was a major bone of contention. Mr. Rajagopalachari was the chief minister. In fact, that's again something which I have to delve deeply, that why should a person who had been Governor General of India agree to become the chief minister of the state? Because that's actually a bit of a stepping down, right? So, and what happened was that at that point of time, the impetus to the Telugu agitation started on a river valley project. When he wanted to shift the waters from the Andhra, from the Godavari basin down south, that is where people started protesting. And again, this whole thing comes up, that whenever major investment projects are made, people think that, and in fact, why people think? It's a fact that the political economy will get shifted. I mean, the economic growth patterns will get shifted when you're shifting territories and you're shifting boundaries. So that's what happened. So then there were deaths, and then finally the Andhra state was made. In fact, very few people are aware that before Andhra Pradesh, there was an Andhra state. This Andhra state was of the areas, Telugu-speaking areas of the erstwhile Madras state. And there was a large chunk of Telugu-speaking people in the erstwhile state of Hyderabad. One of the things which the British had always were trying to do was that they had these administrative regions which did not really take care of the linguistic association of people, because they did not really believe that, and all their language, their language of governance was English, and therefore they did not really bother about these things. So then in 53, this came up. Then in 56, the States Reorganization Committee recommended that Andhra Pradesh should not be, they had recommended that the Telugu-speaking areas of Hyderabad should merge with them, with this after 6 years. But such was the popular mood at that time that the two Telugu-speaking regions came together. But that accord, that certain, that feeling of togetherness could never happen. And therefore, it was a very, so again, it shows that language cannot be the only basis of coming together. So you have this very wonderful example of Andhra passing through various stages. Andhra, demand for a Vishal Andhra, then demand for Telangana. And finally, after many years, again, you find that Telangana got split. Telangana and Hyderabad have gone. So the people of Andhra Pradesh have this, or the Telugu-speaking population still have this little ranjish, as they say. Ranjish is perhaps the best expression, that, first they had their capital in Chennai, because for their grandparents, the capital of the Telugu world was Chennai, and they had a bitter contest in Chennai also on that. Then their capital was Kurnool in the Andhra state for about 3 years. Then it shifted to Hyderabad. And then again, they've been ousted from Hyderabad. And now they have 3 capitals, including one non-functional Amravati and all these things. So, all these are very interesting, things, very interesting stories, which bring me to yet another thing, that before independence, and I'm forgetting the name immediately, but I'll recall it soon, or it doesn't matter. There was a person who had argued that in before 1947, he argued that, these very, very big cities should all be union territories, that they should not be part of any state, because just as you quoted me on Maharashtra, the fact is that Calcutta is also made by Marwadis. I mean, the whole city of Calcutta is based on Marwadi, capital, on their hard work. In fact, the first Calcutta is a very fascinating city. But again, I'm veering away from the point. The point that they were saying is that all metros, all large metros should be independent union territories. That they should not be dependent on the state around them. Because then what happens is suddenly somebody in Bengaluru would come and say, now you must read Kannada, or you must read, in Maharashtra they pass an order saying that, 10th you'll have to do. So as a result of which one of our deputy directors has to leave because daughter is in 9th. So unless she moves into a school there, it'll be very difficult for her to take. So that idea has always been there. Then this is something that I'll write about much later. Then you have this SRC report coming in, and after the SRC report, the interesting thing about the SRC report is that it had 3 members. It had 3 members, included Fazle Ali, and you had H.N. Kunzru, and you had Panikkar. One was a renowned geographer, one was a renowned academic, one was a diplomat, and each of them wrote dissenting notes on different chapters. There is unanimity at the end, but that unanimity is a very interesting unanimity, that they agreed to carry the report with dissenting notes. And almost everybody gave a dissenting note on at least one chapter of the book. So that's the fascinating part of this report. The other thing which I had mentioned in my tweet also, that H.N. Kunzru was the only person who ever refused the Bharat Ratna. I mean, the only person in history, known person who refused the Bharat Ratna. So then we talk about this report and how it led to certain frustrations, how it led to certain other things. And then I started looking at what Ambedkar had said about the linguistic states in the country, the view which Ambedkar had and Gandhi had. So it's very interesting that while they were opposed on many things, as far as the linguistic states are concerned, Ambedkar and Gandhi had a much closer, rapport with each other. I mean, they never had a rapport with each other, but their views as far as the reorganization of linguistic states is concerned was more in coherence. And that again is a very interesting thing, that at some point of time, the Congress party was very keen on centralization. Then it wanted decentralization. At that point of time, the Janasangha, the precursor to the BJP, was totally opposed to any breakup of the states. But now, the last 15-20 years, Mr. Advani's position changed, and now the BJP has also started accepting smaller states. So that's again something which I've tried to capture in this: how the political perceptions change over a period of time, and how over a period of time, it's no longer. When people would say that India is going to break up because of linguistic states, no, I think actually India has gained a lot of strength by the reorganization. And actually, if you notice that now the reorganization is becoming more of a negotiation rather than a street protest. And I think that street protest culture has gone, because finally a lot of Indians have started realizing that this is your own country, that it's your own government. You see, the fact is that even while we were growing up in school and college, the government was something out there, other, different from us. Now that feeling has come in, that we are all together. This is our own government. We shouldn't. Even now we still have burning of buses and all these things, but it is much less than it was many years ago. So with every subsequent chapter in this book, I'll be taking up tomorrow. I'm talking about the Maha Gujarat agitation, because you see, it is not just that and very interestingly, the Maha Gujarat and the Samyukt Maharashtra, both feel that they are discriminated against. So the Maharashtrians feel that they are being discriminated against, and the Gujarat feels that they are being discriminated against. Next week, I'm going to be talking about something which I think is, I mean, of course, as because I'm the creator of all these stories, so I have to be fond of them. But I'm now looking at the 1961 map, because in the 1961 map, you see the map had been made in which, in all the maps till 1961, Goa is shown as Portuguese territory because it was Portugal till then. Now the map of 61 had been printed, and on the 18th of December or the 12th somewhere in the middle of December in Indian, the Indian army went and took over Goa because all settlement and all negotiations had failed. By that time, the map had been printed. So on the map, they put a little black tape. So Goa did not come into existence. So when the map was printed, Goa was still Portugal. At the time of the map, after the map had been printed, so they had to put a black tape on that. That's a very interesting, because you don't really get such maps. No? These are the little interesting things about maps. So that map has a very rare historical quality. So finally, and then in 62 war, a map was not produced because of the tensions and all these things at that time. So finally, in the 64 map, Goa is Goa without Portugal. So next week I'll capture that. Then you see there is how, and again, I mean, some things which are there. Although Nehru did mention about the areas under Portugal and under France in his very first address when he was addressing the nation, that our freedom is not complete because this or, but unfortunately, in the Constitution of India, we did not keep a provision for the administration of we did not. I mean, perhaps at that time, some oversight on the part of the drafting committee that they did not anticipate how would we integrate the areas of the country which are still not a part of us, and therefore we had to bring in the Administration of Foreign Territories Act to administer these places. Then we will come to the Punjabi Suba agitation of the 1966. Then 1971 we'll come to the reorganization of states in the Northeast. Then we'll go on the story. This is how the story will evolve. So it's going to take me some time to complete it, because every story leads to many, many more stories, and each story is very fascinating. And I'm in no hurry to complete the book, because it's a post-retirement project as well. It's a magnum opus, so it'll take its own time.
But I think beautiful, sir. I mean, it was very, very riveting to listen to the story and how you've woven the whole narrative about the mapping of the Indian states. And as I told you earlier, I really loved the way you've titled it, because it's beautiful and something which is very, very contemporary, especially with what happened in Kashmir last year, where you had some reshaping which took place. What is now happening in Nepal, or rather Nepal is trying to do something. Just one little question, because we are also nearing the end of our session time. So I found your chapter which you had tweeted on the founding fathers, about which you mentioned, very, very interesting, that Hyderabad was also being looked as an option for a second capital. Reminded me of the Tughlaq era, where actually there was a movement from Delhi to Deccan kind of a thing. So very, very nice that was. And also what Ambedkar said, and I'm quoting it for the benefit of the audience from what sir has tweeted, that very briefly he argues that one state, one language is not the same as one language, one state. So I think that was very, very profound, very, very profound way of, so beautiful. We are looking forward to the book, and we will be your conscience keeper, because as an audience whose curiosity has been piqued, I am looking forward to reading that book very, very soon. And also might I suggest to you, sir, once you finish this book, if you could also look at the SAARC region and how, countries, from moving from mapping of the states to maybe mapping of the country's boundaries in some way.
Some way, you see, in some way, I'm already doing something on the frontiers of Pakistan, because you see, Kalat, incidentally, one of the books which was nominated for our book prize this time was Tilak Devesh's book on Balochistan. And Balochistan is a very interesting case again, where Jinnah held the brief for the Khan of Kalat. Jinnah argued with the Secretary of State for India, saying that look, Kalat cannot be part of Pakistan because the status of Kalat is the same as the status of Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim. Incidentally, the status of Nepal was different from the status of Sikkim and Bhutan. Sikkim, Bhutan, Kalat were in one category. Nepal was in yet another category. But insofar as Sikkim and Bhutan and Kalat are concerned, they were protectorates in the sense they were not really, it was not like Jodhpur or like Bhopal or like Hyderabad and all these places. So in 46, Jinnah held a brief for the Khan of Kalat. In 1948, he sort of annexed that whole territory, did not give a damn to his own arguments, which also shows something about the personality of a person. You see, one of the things which I've liked and which I've admired in our freedom movement is the truth and the consistency of the Mahatma. The truth and the consistency of the Mahatma and Patel, Ambedkar and Nehru, they were fighting with each other. They had differences of opinion with each other, but they stood by their word. I mean, they could stand by what they said. In fact, as far as Kalat is concerned, India said that we do not want to, we will not take your accession. You will not take your accession because there is the two factors which should be there. There should be geographic connect or there should be a demographic connect. With Kalat, we neither have a demographic connect nor do we have a geographic connect. So thank you very much, but we're not going to be doing it. So we did not fish in troubled waters at that time. And I still think it's sensible to not fish in troubled waters. But the fact is that the accession of Kalat to Pakistan is a very contested accession. And Balochistan is 48% of Pakistan's area. 48% of Pakistan's area. So, I mean, the history of the subcontinent itself will also be very interesting, very fascinating. And in fact, that will bring us to how Sikkim, to demographic changes which lead to political changes. But that's for another day, another time. Mugdha, thank you for suggesting that after this work is over, we'll start something else, because I really look forward to my superannuation. I'm going to be in Dehradun, and Mussoorie Library is not far away from here. So I'll be coming here 2-3 times a week and going to the Survey of India Library, which is close to my home, and read and write and have these dialogues. It'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, we are looking forward to more dialogues. There are a lot of questions from the audience, and I would personally suggest that you also bring out the stories about other aspiring regions who are wanting to have their own statehood. Maybe, say, for example, Gorkhaland or Vidarbha, which have been in contestation for quite some time in terms of the political aspirations of the people, the feasibility, the possibility, and those kind of things. So we look forward to following you on Twitter and reading your beautiful stories till the book comes out. And we still have about 10 minutes, so we will be happy to take a few questions, sir, from the audience, which are there on our live chat. Mr. Bishwanath Chaudhary is from Nepal, and he speaks that, would you please throw some light on the Sagauli Treaty and about Nepal claiming its own land? Nepal has already invited India to discuss this issue on the round table and told that truth should prevail. So I'll read out the question, sir. You could pick and choose an answer. So then there is Neeraj Chaudhary. He's an administrative officer, Rajasthan State Service officer. He says, collaboration and cooperation, great philosophy to work, sir. Truly phenomenal. He just has an observation, sorry. And Shivani is complimenting. Mahendra Parekh wants to know, will you please indicate the importance of team building in administration, is a question that has come from him. And a lot of senior people, sir, Srinivas, V. Srinivas, sir, of the Rajasthan cadre, now additional secretary in Department of Administrative Reform, says, very interesting discussion, congratulations. You have Lipi Parida ji, so rightfully put. Then you have Meena Bahadur ji, wife of a very senior and now retired civil servant from Rajasthan. Very illuminating conversation, she says. Ramnivas Mehta says about your thing on Ajmer. He says Ajmer, with very strong intellectual, educational and cultural and religious center in Rajputana, appears to have become a loser city post 1947. Your views, sir. then they're all interesting conversations. That was interesting. Reorganization of boundaries of Bengal a couple of years ago was again a significant exercise. So these are a few of the questions that we have from the audience, and we have not actually discussed one aspect of the administration's interaction with one of the pillars of democracy, which is the judiciary. So maybe team building and how do you coordinate? You've had any instances, of interactions or anecdotal stories? I think we could take those before we wound up for the day, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for all the very, very positive comments. Thank you, Srini, and thank you, Lipiji. These are people with whom we've been in correspondence and very keen supporters of WOW as well. Although Srinivas touched us last minute for that, and Lipi also could not come last minute because of some reason. Okay, friends, I'll skip the Treaty of Sigoli because I have not read about it. And when I read about it, I can comment about it. But right now, I will not. Perhaps that conversation of Nepal would come when we come to the borders of Uttarakhand, because in Uttarakhand, right up to Dehradun, the Nepal forces had joined hands. And that's a much later chapter. But, and I would also like to comment on what Mr. Mehta said about Ajmer, losing out. It's a fact, because what was happening was that Ajmer was the sort of showpiece of the British Raj, was the showpiece, because it was the only territory in the whole of Rajputana where the Britishers had their sway. And therefore, they wanted to make it a model city. And therefore, naturally, after it ceased to be the center of gravity for the administration, because at that time, it was a chief commissioner's province. It had earlier been part of British India. So it certainly lost out in this process. And which is what happens to a lot of cities, which if they don't become capitals, if they don't become so important, they tend to lose out. In fact, the whole debate in Rajasthan on where your capital should be, it's a major debate. It was a great difficulty. It was a very difficult compromise to have. That's why you still have your High Court in Jodhpur, right? So yes. These are difficult balancing equations. In Patiala, for instance, did so well. Kapurthala, the state where I come from, got totally neglected because nothing came up there. And some of the other, unless government investments take place, government investment not in terms of physical, in terms of colleges, in terms of schools, in terms of various things. So all this makes a difference. Now, two very significant things. One is about the relationship with judiciary and about team building. On team building, I would say that rather than talk about it, let's just start doing it. And how do you do it? You do it by knowing your team members first. See, all theories of team building will go for a knot. If you do not know anything about the people you're working with. You see, if I do not know my faculty colleagues in the academy as the director, the principal people who are going to communicate my thoughts with this are my own, 12 deputy directors. So if I do not know my 12 deputy directors like the palm of my hand, if I don't know about them, if I don't know about their spouses, if I don't know about the children, if I don't know what they like to read, then I cannot get my mandate implemented here. Because the first and the most important thing in team building is understanding your team, sharing your thoughts with them, most importantly, listening to what they have to say to you, because it's very easy when you're in the top position, everybody listens to you. But no, they're not listening to you really. They are only hearing what you are saying. So there's a difference between hearing and listening. In fact, in WOW, one of the main things that we say is two things that are missing out in our discourses. One is to appreciate excellence in others. That's a core statement which the WOW philosophy has, because we're so comfortable with talking about how good we are. मैंने ये कर दिया, हमने ये कर दिया, हमने ये तोप गाड़ दिया, उसने वो. We have to learn to appreciate excellence in others. And second, we have to learn to listen. And both these are key. Both these are key to your strengthening of your team. Because you cannot strengthen your team unless you have learned to appreciate excellence in your own team. And when your team is comfortable with you, so if you're a DM, then your SDOs have to be comfortable with you. If you're an SDO, then your BDOs have to be comfortable with you. If wherever you are, you will have a team around you, and that team must feel comfortable, confident, and they must have confidence in you. They must have confidence to tell you what they think. In fact, again, on this COVID issue, on whether we should have an online phase 2 or not have an online phase 2, opinions are bound to be divided because all of us will have our own views. But it's very important that we discuss every view. After having discussed our viewpoint, then of course a decision will be taken, and we expect everybody to participate in it. But not letting people or letting people speak is not the right word. Are we comfortable to speak with each other? If we are not comfortable speaking with each other, then we've lost the battle. I mean, we've half lost that battle. Second was the issue about judiciary. Now, you see, first time, we've actually tried to reach out to the judiciary, but the judiciary also has its own angst with us. Fortunately, now my very dear friend is the J2 in Uttarakhand, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia. So together with him, we've had workshops here in the academy with all the judicial officers of Uttarakhand, and the National Gender Center has had this workshop with the duty holders where for the first time anywhere, we got judges, prosecutors, doctors, social workers, IAS officers, IPS officers, and investigating officers from the level of the sub-inspectors to talk and discuss on how do you handle cases where women are involved and where juveniles are in conflict with law. So that was a very interesting experience. We realized, for example, that half the battle is, you lose half the battle because we don't have forensic science labs. If you don't have a forensic science lab, then what do? You can be a very good judge, you can be a very good prosecutor, but where is the basic evidence on record? Have we sensitized see, after all, if we talk about a woman in conflict with law or let's say a woman of domestic violence or sexual harassment, if she goes to a doctor, if she goes to a PHC, now unless we've sensitized the PHC, unless we've sensitized the nurse there, unless we've sensitized, so it's a big chain. So, and in fact, if you look at any success in the government, all success in the government can be based only on teamwork. So if Bhilwara has done well, it is because of teamwork. If any place has done well, it is because of teamwork. Individuals, we have a role to play in history, but our role in history is a rather limited role. In fact, there's a very nice Urdu couplet which says, "Ek halki hai zanjeer to zanjeer nahi, ek halki hai takdeer to takdeer nahi, takdeer to qaumo ki hua karti hai, ek shakhs ki kismat koi takdeer nahi." So individuals do not have a destiny. In fact, last year when Dr. Jitendra Singh was here, he's also a great history buff, our minister. He said, 60 years of the academy. He says, academy can have 60 years, but, he says that institutions have very, very long lives. An individual can feel very happy, 60 ho gaye, 70 ho gaye, 100 mein to jana hi hai. But great institutions are great institutions which move on for ages and ages and ages and ages and ages. It is this institution building that we have to strengthen. It is that tradition that we have to develop, and live institutions will be those which will cut out what is the inessential chaff and move to the solid grain. So coming back to judiciary, I think we need to reach out. You see, we need to reach out, and I think that's a little bit of. Of course, we are all overworked. But even if we are overworked, one call on to the district judge as a district magistrate, or if I go and, if amongst the list of call-ons that the director of the academy does, in fact, that this is what has helped me. You normally call on the governor and the chief minister of the state when you take charge. I also thought, let me put in a request to the chief justice, although he sits in Nainital. He was very happy to receive me. And so it was a courtesy call with the Chief Justice of the state. So now he's put me on the Legal Services Authority. He's made me a part of the Ujala, which is their Administrative and Legal Services Academy. So we've invited a lot of judicial people. Justice Lakoor comes here very often. Faizan Mustafa comes here very often. So this is how Justice Dhulia comes in. So this is how, in fact, training institutions have a lot of potential of doing a lot of bridge building, of cutting down I would say the apprehensions that we have about each other. So unless we call, in fact, and let's also face it. There's a lot of animosity, not animosity, but there's a little bit of, relationship with the services in uniform are not always very happy, right? So I decided to call on the director of the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Police Academy. there was a feeling that why should I go and call on them? They've never called. It doesn't matter. Let's go and call on him. We are now have a wonderful, absolutely great rapport with my colleague, Atul, who heads the police academy. So it's for us to reach out. It's for us to reach out. If somebody reaches out, extend your hand, and that's how the country will grow. Because the country belongs to all of us. All of us belong to the country, and the country belongs to all of us. And putting it in the right frame, taking the right leap, you have to take everybody along. Otherwise, it's not a solo party. It's not a solo party. And I want to make another thing. You see, it will take us time to understand. You see, we are very good individual players. Even our instruments, very good sitar, very good this. At best, jugalbandi, tabla and sitar. But we have to learn to play a Philharmonic orchestra. We need to play a 95-piece orchestra. We need to play a 400-piece orchestra. Because when you play a 400-piece orchestra, that's when you will get everybody along. And the Vadya Vrind of the All India Radio is one lovely example where you get 110 odd instruments, everything. I mean, from Vichitra Veena to Sarangi to sitar to sarod to bansuri to flute to the violin to every Indian instrument. Both from the classical North Indian tradition and the Carnatic tradition. Put it all together, and then when you do your Sare Jahan Se Acha, or then it is a different feel that you get. So that's what we will look forward to, and I'm sure that with a lot of young people listening, we'll be able to achieve that very soon.
So thank you very much. Truly mesmerizing to listen to you always. And I thank you very much for mentoring us all the way, and for all the lovely conversations that we've had with you today, sir. It's extremely heartening to know that technology has facilitated and in fact, it has enabled us today to do this conversation, and it has improved the efficiency and improved, rather I would say, enhanced the outreach with less anxiety pangs, I would say, because when you do it in a physical world, you have to ensure your seats are all filled, people walk in at different times, but coming from an organizer. So it is wonderful, sir. It was beautiful listening to you, and it is, we could go on and on, such beautiful, wonderful, informative, interesting conversations. But the tech world also has certain limitations, because the tech world has also brought the judiciary, together closer to the civil service, because we are providing a lot of infrastructural and software algorithmic support to them. So I think the COVID virus, I always say that, 1 gram nano-sized invisible virus has the potential to bring us all together, much needed in these times. So thank you very much. On behalf not just of the Indian Administrative Society, Literary Society of the Rajasthan Civil Service Association, but also on behalf of all the lovely people who have joined in. Some of us are my batchmates, your probationers, also on the live chat. And once we share the link, sir, you can go through all the comments. Also share it on the LBSNA page if you want, for greater outreach. This was a lovely conversation. One of the best so far, I would say, in the tech world. So thank you profusely.
You're being very kind, and also because you're my probationer, so whatever you say has to be discounted, right?
Yeah.
Whatever we say about each other has to be discounted.
I could give you a hug at this point in time, but I'll do a virtual e-hug. Thank you so much for being such a great human being, for such a lovely officer, and for inspiring us with your stories and your words and your advice. I'm sure this session has proved extremely useful for everybody who joined in. And I think you are just the person who can bring people together and connect the dots. So thank you very much once again. Have a lovely time rehearing this conversation, sir. And look forward to all your stories on Twitter, sir. And to a long, long partnership for many, many years ahead. More strength to your pen and more strength to your anecdotes and stories. Thank you very much. With that, we close our session today. Just to let everybody know that because the tech has facilitated this, we will be back again next Saturday, which is the 20th, with something very, very important. We will be talking, we will be in conversation with another author and a public historian on the afterlives of monuments. We will have Dr. Shashank S. Sinha talk to us on what happens once the monument is built, and the stories around several monuments that he will pick up and speak to us about. So do join us And please follow us on our Instagram and Facebook page at the rate of IASLITSOC, which stands for the IAS Literary Society of Rajasthan. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. All the best and bye-bye.